Head of Enterprise Community Animation.
Good morning, Councillor Jamie Trahan, Member for Overmarne Ward and Member of this committee.
Sorry about that. Good morning, Councillor David Davey, St King's Mark, Ward Chepstow, and a member of this committee.
Councillor Sarah Jones, Cabinet Member for Social Justice and Community Development and Member for the Llanover Ward.
Councillor Val Smith, Lambaddock Ward, Member of this committee.
Councillor Linda Guppy, Member of this committee and Member for Roggett Ward.
Morning. Good morning. I'm a member for the County Council member for St Albans and Tintern, and also a member of this committee.
County Councillor Dimitri Petruni, Leader of the Labour Group, and not a member of this committee.
Tudor Thomas, County Councillor for Priory and Abergavenny. I'm not normally a member of the committee, but I'm substituting for County Councillor Roger Harris today. Diolch yn fawr.
And I'm County Councillor Tony Easton, member for Dewstow Caldecott, a member of this committee, and as Wales Auditor, I'm also a member of Monmouthshire's Audit Committee.
Thank you. Thanks for your help. Thank you. That one there. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. I'll keep it brief. Firstly, we're, as Lambaddock Community Council, very encouraged by the work that's been done on the Usk Regeneration Project, and we thank the County Council and us Town Council for that invitation. We look forward to bringing the project to a satisfactory conclusion in the new year. Thank you for that. We had our Lambaddock Community Council meeting last evening and a couple of issues came up, and I apologise for backfooting any councillors on these issues. They're only new to us from last evening. Firstly, for the first time in living memory of the Community Council, Churchview cottages adjacent to Lambaddock Church were flooded recently. We're delighted to hear that a member of an officer from Monmouthshire County Council visited the scene of the crime earlier this week, and we hope there'll be some good work coming out of that. The two issues appear to be the road drains outside Churchview cottages, and we wonder if special attention could be given to those road drains in future to try and keep them down. This is the first time those properties have flooded, and we'd like to think it might be the last, though we are appreciative of flooding problems obviously throughout the county. That would be the first point. The second point that was raised last night is in relation to Monkswood and various issues around speeding, around lack of signage, and around lack of availability in parking outside St Mark's Church for funerals, etc. I've had a quick look up there this morning, but I was driving, so it wasn't easy to see the exact and precise issues being raised last evening. But I wonder if it would be possible to perhaps arrange a site meeting with officers of the County Council and local residents and the Community Council to see if we can't move these issues forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Sutherland. Obviously today we don't have those officers available to answer your questions, but I will follow up at the end of the meeting and make sure someone contacts you to arrange a site meeting. Is that okay? Thank you.
May I just, as the local member, long-standing members will remember the issues that I have raised over the years, the motions put to council, the speed issues, the concerns of all the residents
councillors,
that have been registered.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
If we could just quickly go to declarations of interest now, as and when. Yes? Is there any apologies for absence? There is none. We've got a full house and we've got some visiting members. So we'll move on to item 4, reducing child poverty and social inclusion and improve economic inclusion, scrutiny of the Wales Audit Office report and its recommendations. So I will hand over to Charlotte, who's here today to present this report. Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, if you don't mind, and with your permission, just to give a little bit of context to members. This is a piece of work carried out by the Wales Audit Office. It's the second such study we've had of this type. And it's looking at how the local authority is implementing the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in terms of the economic, social, environmental and cultural well-being, and whether we're carrying that out in accordance with the Sustainable Development Principle. So I'm sure members don't need reminding, but just for the benefits of those on the live stream, we have a corporate plan which incorporates the well-being objectives of Monmouthshire County Council as a public body. Within that, there are 79 actions or steps. These pieces of work which Wales Audit Office are doing throughout Wales as well as in Monmouthshire require sort of the identification of one of those steps out of the 79 and using that as a lens to assess how well we are implementing the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So it's a Wellbeing of Future Generations report. Often these go through to audit committee, but what we don't like to do is have things go into multiple committees. And because the subject matter that's been looked at as part of this is of such relevance to this committee and the issues being looked at, we decided it makes sense to bring it forward for this committee rather than it go to audit committee and then be referred on to this committee. So just as a reminder, the step being looked at, and sort of Charlotte will pick up on the detail, is that to reduce child poverty and social isolation and improve economic inclusion. And just as a reminder, a sort of further bit of context in terms of the Act. When the Act talks, the Future Generations Act talks about long-term, it's talking about long-term in generational terms. That is looking up to sort of 25 years ahead. So when we talk long-term in Future Generations language, that's what we mean. It's talking of future generations and broadly speaking, that sort of 25-year time frame. I'm happy to sort of come in later on as our other officers later on, but Chair, with your permission, I'll sort of pass over to
Yes,
please.
Charlotte.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, as Matt mentioned, this review is looking at the council's step to reduce child poverty and social isolation and to improve economic inclusion. And we've looked at this through the lens of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So we were looking at the extent to which the council has been applying the Sustainable Development Principle in taking steps to address that step. So our overall finding was that the Council is starting to apply the Sustainable Development Principle in relation to its social justice agenda, but does not yet have a long-term plan. And I'll run you through each of the 5 ways of working which make up the Sustainable Development Principle and give you our overall heading in those areas. So for long term, we've said that the Council has a good understanding of the issues and challenges, but does not yet have a long-term plan to deliver this step. So we found a number of positive areas here. The Council has obviously established a 5-year social justice strategy, and there's also an advisory group to oversee that and a cabinet portfolio for social justice. And there's work taking place with public service boards to develop some measures to be able to understand the current state of wellbeing in the county. The area for improvement that we identified under long term is the fact that, as Matt mentioned, long term in the context of the WFG Act is around 25 years, whereas the social justice strategy at the moment runs for a 5-year period. So we've just suggested that you might want to look at that to make it a more long-term plan. Then moving on to prevention, we've said that the Council has designed this step with a clear focus on prevention, but does not have a means of measuring preventative outcomes over the long term at the moment. So we found that the Council has got a good understanding of the root causes of child poverty and social isolation, and there's a number of actions in place in the strategy to help prevent future poverty and isolation. In terms of areas for improvement, we found that at the moment there isn't a specific additional budget to deliver the social justice strategy that's coming out of existing funding, and the Council is currently considering using grant funding to target delivery of the step. And also the Council has not yet developed ways to measure preventative outcomes over the long term. Then in terms of collaboration, we found that collaboration is a key means of delivering the Council's social justice agenda, and there are well-established collaborative arrangements which the Council facilitates. And we found a large number of examples of the way that the Council is working with other bodies and other organisations to help deliver this step. In terms of the areas for improvement, a lot of those were around just developing initiatives that are currently underway and just starting. So things like holiday hunger, which the council has started to address, working with town councils more closely, and also working with the business sector to see what role that they can play. The next area is involvement, and we've said that the council has identified some groups and individuals that it needs to reach to deliver this step, and has also involved key stakeholders, but is aware that more needs to be done. And this really just reflects the fact that a lot of work has taken place with local people and key stakeholders, but I think there's always more that can be done to involve people. And in terms of the areas for improvement, we flagged up the work that started with the Department of Work and Pensions to highlight the issues around universal credit. And so just more work needed there to understand the data around that and be able to use that data to help target the people that need support. Also the fact that more work is needed to connect with farmers who can experience social isolation and obviously are affected by changes with technology and Brexit. And council officers also told us that they know who in the county needs more support in terms of poverty, and it's around working more with those individuals and communities to provide services targeted to them. This piece of work is a little bit different to our usual ones in terms of we don't provide proposals for improvement. So early, I think it was last month, we met with some of the people involved in this review and held a workshop and reported back our findings, and we worked with them to develop an action plan. So you'll see in the report, I think it's Exhibit 2, that the council have provided an action plan which they feel addresses the key issues that we've identified as areas for improvement. So I'll run through those with you. So one is to review the current vision and ambition to ensure it looks beyond the medium term and make this explicit in the next update of the strategy. Also to ensure that authors embed reference to social justice in all strategies within the council's policy framework. To work with partners to ensure that the conditions and systems are in place to involve the community in addressing challenges facing the county. And to increase capacity and capability in data modelling and use of spatial data and apply this to issues. And obviously, as a select committee, you'll have the opportunity to see how the council is progressing against those actions. Very happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Charlotte. Do any of the officers want to come in, or are you happy for me to hand over to members? Yeah? Okay. Members, if we can have your questions and recommendations, and I ask Councillor Jones and Petruni if you can wait till after members have exhausted their list of questions. Is that okay? Thank you. Councillor Guffey.
We'd like to ask why out of all the other areas, why you chose this topic, and have you been comparing, contrasting with other areas, and have you chosen the same topic within the other counties so that we could look for benchmark for good work or not so good work that's happening within Wales, really?
Thank you. This step was chosen. We discussed with the council a step that would be useful for us to gain an insight into what was happening in terms of the WFG Act in the council. We also, because it's quite early on in terms of the Act, we wanted to work with the council to identify an area where there was an opportunity to show the types of ways that they're using the Sustainable Development Principle. It's not something that we've looked at across Wales. Each council area sort of has helped choose specific areas. I'm not aware that we've looked at this anywhere else, but I can certainly check to see if there's any learning that we can take from elsewhere to share that with you. I think as the years go on, this is obviously something which affects many parts of Wales, and I would imagine as the years go on and we look at more steps across other councils, it may be something that comes up elsewhere. So I'll certainly be very happy to share any information that if we've looked at this elsewhere for you.
Does anyone have any further questions? Councillor Traherne.
Thank you, Chair. Who defines good and what good looks like? And are each of the local authorities assessed individually, or are we assessed as a whole, as one unitary? Because each authority is different to another, and Monmouthshire is a very rural area, so what works in one area of Monmouthshire might not work. So who sets those bars of those levels, and who's responsible for that, please?
In the report, you'll see under each of the 5 ways of working, we set out evidence of what we look for. Those are set by the Wellbeing and Future Generations Commissioner, and it gives an indication of the types of things that councils should be looking at in terms of those 5 ways of working. We don't, as part of this piece of work, compare what's going on at Monmouthshire with any other council. It's sort of strictly against the criteria of the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act. And hopefully, as part of that, we will take into account the individual sort of demands of a particular county, what you know, is more difficult in a particular area. So as I say, it's not something where we're comparing like for like. So in future, if we do look at this piece of work at a different council, which might have different challenges and opportunities, it wouldn't be a case of comparing it to Monmouthshire. As you say, each council has different, you know, different situation to deal with.
Councillor Smith?
Not a question, just to say that it's nice to see that you appreciate the GovTech work that's going on, that's referred to in the transport, because communication transport is so important. The isolation and what isolation does to people, it impacts on everything. So that bullet point down there, 5 on number 29, it's nice to see it's recognised. And it'd be good to see it coming to a positive, not conclusion, but actually moving forward, not just a talking shop, but actually something rolling.
Councillor Eason.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, Councillor Smith has sort of touched on what I wanted to say. You don't seem to be looking at the definition of what child poverty and social isolation is. There doesn't seem to be anything in the report which sort of hones you in on that area. And it's a difficult subject to talk about this morning because we're in Purda, and so we can't go into political reasons of where we are. But what do you consider to be child poverty? Or is there any consideration with Wales Audit to look at what child poverty is and what social inclusion is? I see it in my ward. It's very hard to define unless you actually meet individuals who have a particular problem. So the report doesn't seem to me to highlight child poverty and social isolation as such, just the subject.
Thank you. Yes, this report is a little bit different to our other ones in terms of we're not necessarily looking at the topic of the steps. So obviously in this case, social isolation, we're looking at it very much through the lens of how you're applying the Sustainable Development Principle. So we haven't really looked at how you have defined child poverty at all. It is potentially something we could look at in a future piece of work if the council felt that that would be useful for us to look at. But this piece of work is very much just through the WFG Act lens.
But surely we should be looking on the ground, on not individual cases, but cases which may come to individually. For example, I have a case or 2 cases in my ward where it takes 3 or 4 agencies to really get to know who those agencies are to help that particular level of social inclusion. So I don't feel this report helps me much, to be quite honest.
No, this report is really to give the council assurance or otherwise over how it is putting into place the requirements of the WFG Act. So it doesn't give any view on how well you are addressing this step. In a way, it's how you're addressing the ability to work through the 5 ways of working and that Sustainable Development Principle. And that's why we don't give any judgments on the actual work that's being done or the definitions of social isolation and child poverty.
Councillor Webb.
Golly, thank you very much for the report and for all your work on this. Have you looked, with regard to social isolation, have you looked into the people that are taking community meals, and have you discussed that with the officers that are looking at that really important service?
No, that didn't come up as part of the review, I'm afraid.
Would you consider that it should?
again, because we're only looking at this through the lens of the WFG Act and how the council is adhering to that, we've not looked specifically at the topic of social isolation and child poverty.
Councillor Dovey.
Thank you, Chairman. You mentioned in the report, and thank you for the report, you mentioned issues of transport. I am not aware that you have ever approached the Strategic Transport Group with regard to your particular issues. It would be a really good idea if you did that, because we could probably help in finding the right solutions to some of the issues that you have. Perhaps you could speak to me sometime when it's convenient, and we arrange a meeting to see how we could move that forward a better way. And perhaps on various meetings that we do have where it's appropriate, you have a representative on it to speak about your current position, whatever it may be. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, certainly very happy to do that.
Can I ask a question? How do you propose to improve how you measure outcomes?
Yeah, Chair, happy for that one. Obviously, poverty is a really complex and multifaceted approach. A paper was recently taken through to the Social Justice Group on the different ways in which poverty can be measured. There are a number of different approaches to that. So, for example, one of the common definitions is 60% of medium income. One of the challenges of measuring poverty, I think, by conventional measures is you actually have a lot of lagging measures. We don't really know until you've implemented an action, you've looked at something, whether it's made a difference. So it is about a mix of looking at milestones to track the progress of some of the different projects and interventions, and some of those measures. I think one of the things we recognise as an authority, and which Charlotte and WO have highlighted in the report, is the need to invest more, I think, capacity and sort of resource into the data aspects, because that's really important for us from a few angles. One, measurement and tracking whether we've been successful, but also targeting those interventions in the first place. Interestingly, since I think the Social Justice Group met for the last time, we've begun some conversations with Swansea University, the Department of Economics, and we'll be doing some pilot work with them on poverty. So potentially, they've developed some new modelling. They're keen to work with a public service on testing that out, and are quite keen for that authority to be Monmouthshire. So effectively, we can feed in a whole host of different data at a community level to identify some of the different patterns and some of the factors that impact on poverty, that cause poverty. And rather than traditional data modelling, and sorry to be a bit geeky, I do this from time to time, you look at a graph and you'll have two variables. So it will have perhaps sort of skill levels on one and income on another. What Swansea are doing is enable us to feed in a whole host of data, and their computer modelling will start to identify patterns, which it would have been hard to do as a sort of a human being, thousands of man hours to do that. So we're starting to feed that data into them, and then hopefully what we will start to see from that is some of the patterns emerge that will give us some of the potential, not just the geographies where poverty is more prevalent, because we'll be feeding in a greater sort of granularity of detail, but also some of the relationships and factors that impact on and result in households falling into poverty, which in turn will enable us to sort of commission and put different sort of interventions in place. So it's an early stage in terms of that work. But at a future date, we'd be happy to report back to the committee on progress on that one. I'm not sure whether sort of Francis or Kath would want to input further on that. Francis had sort of instigated the discussions with Swansea.
Thank you, Matt. So we're working with Professor Don Webber at Swansea University, who's the head of economics there, and he's approached us working on two different projects, and one around this data research piece is quite interesting because it's the first time that the university will have tested an academic research methodology that they use in other things within a public policy, public sector context. So it's very interesting. You know, the results will be the results, and I think it'll be useful to see what it churns out, what it tells us, what it will do. I don't think it will necessarily give us answers and solutions. It will give us better insight and better data and far greater information than we've currently got. So it's very exciting and something that we'll definitely bring back to this committee when we're ready. Thank you, Matt.
Are there any... Tudor, sorry.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the input today from Welsh Government. More of a comment, really, but I'm glad to see that you've recommended that the authority looks at this long term. 5 years really is far too short term. For children born into poverty today, the outcomes in terms of education and the jobs that they move into and where they move to will obviously not sort of work out until they're in 18, 19, 20, etc. My background is education. I taught in the authority a long time ago, and certainly I can see that the many children that I taught many years ago who were probably in poverty, however you define that, haven't really moved on. So I think long term is important, and particularly in terms of children born today, what's going to happen to them. And in reality, it does create more of an urgency, you know, and I take Matt's points about how do you measure. In education, you can measure in terms of outcomes at Key Stage 2 or Key Stage 4, etc. It's more difficult with poverty, and it's more difficult to actually define is it relative poverty, etc. So I think I commend that, and I also commend the thought that, you know, raising the issue that there's no additional budget there. It's quite difficult to do something without having some physical resource, which obviously implies pound, shillings and pence, really. So, you know, I do commend that.
Does anyone want to come back on that, or should we move?
Sorry. Just with regards to the budget, when we were discussing it with Welsh Audit Office, at the moment there is no dedicated budget for this particular part of policy, but there are activities that are already occurring within different departments and within different service areas. And where Charlotte referred to grant funding, we're looking at additional funding on top of that provision that we're already doing to work towards the aspects of the policy. So just thought that was just worth clarifying.
Sorry, Chair, just to come in and add to that, really, I think one of the things this report touches on, if my memory is correct, we certainly discussed it in the workshop, are some of the things which are in place to try and intervene early and prevent. So as an example, one of the things we're looking at the Public Service Board and have been looking at, and PSB Select Committee has received a presentation on this, is the Early Help and Intervention Panel, a multi-agency panel where families can be referred in, and you identify the most appropriate partners to work with those families. Now, that work has been led and taken forward by colleagues in health. You know, so what I want to highlight is this challenge of funding is not unique to us. Health are also grappling with this. So they've been using some of the intermediate care funding, which is a short-term funding stream to run that. But of course, the challenge with funding early intervention schemes is you need to fund the early intervention as well as your ongoing service delivery until such time as the early intervention kicks in and you start to see the longer term benefits. So it does necessitate a twin tracking of funding. So I think as a public service as a whole, looking across the whole system, this is one of those big issues we need to grapple with, is how we invest in early intervention and prevention while not removing those core services that people depend on today. You know, and that's one of these big issues we need to grapple, to engage with Welsh Government around and continue to make the case for more sort of accessing more innovative funding streams to start to do things differently.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas, do you want to come back on that?
Not really. I mean, I appreciate that, and you know, I thank you for that. But certainly, again, you know, another of my roles, I'm on corporate parenting, and certainly child services always say about early intervention. You know, it's no good trying to intervene when a child is, say, 12 years of age. You know, if they've suffered deprivation up until that point, then those effects are long-lasting and very difficult, you know, to eradicate. And as I say, I think in terms of having a long-term measure, we need to have that. But in reality, if we're to do something effective, then in one way or another, we have to carve a budget for social justice to be able to actually do something on top of what we're doing. And I know, you know, much of what the authority does now is good practice. But if you go to any of the areas in Monmouthshire, you have this huge dichotomy, and the outside impression is it's a middle-class leafy suburb, and much of it is, but much of it isn't. And I think when you're actually out on the ground, if you're an elected member, or if you've taught in the area or worked in the area, then you see this dichotomy, and it's a very harsh dichotomy. And that's the thing that I would say, and I think it needs to inject some urgency into our sort of forward thinking. But thanks for your reply.
Thank you. You reference working with partners and community groups. How can we be confident we're working with the right people?
Hi. I think in terms of our community and partnership development team, they're very much located within the community, bringing back issues, and actually are our bridge really between what's happening within our communities and how we're setting policy. And we're able then to bring those views in and to act on that. And I think certainly the way that some of the groups are working, for example, in some of the work that Jude Langdon has been doing in terms of some of the tackling poverty work, working with colleagues in housing to bring those things to the fore, it gives us that opportunity to do that. But where there are opportunities that people feel we're missing, it's really important that they share those with us so we can feed that back in.
Are there any more members' questions? Councillor Dovey.
Not so much a question. I have one concern, and it's one that goes back to another council. I've been here a little while. And when I hear of these new initiatives as suggested by this professor in Swansea, I've seen some of those put in front of us. And to be truthful, they are difficult to understand on occasion. I think perhaps the academic doesn't talk, if you like, at the right level, understandable level, to lay members like ourselves. I would really hope that when you have a chance to make an input into whatever report that is going to be put in front of it, the reasons are clear and as simply explained as they can possibly be, so Luddites like me can understand what's going on, if you like, and also the public when they have sight of it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dovey. Are there any further questions? Councillor Petruni, would you like to ask some questions?
Certainly would. Thank you, Chair. I thank the Audit Office for their report. Questions directed at you mainly. The lens you viewed it through the Wellbeing Act, is that really sufficient? I've given your responses as very limited from what you've been able to give us. No comparisons with other local authorities, good or bad, telling us anything useful. In a sense, it's just like we've looked at it, this might be what you looked at. I mean, it's interesting you've talked about no budget. That I think is a key point. But surely the bigger point is that if there's no long-term plan, so basically measuring 25 years, that is the only way you can properly see if your poverty measures working at a preventative level at, say, 4-year-old has actually worked and they've reached adulthood. So that's a fundamental flaw, isn't it? Because if you can't, it is a 20, 25-year project because you don't know if your intervention has worked. unless they've become a well-rounded adult, wherever that might be. So that's a critical pillar that needs to be addressed. So I appreciate you highlighting that. But in terms of your analysis, I'm interested in how you've approached it. Have you interviewed officers, read the documents, obviously, I assume, interviewed the cabinet member? What can you explain to me your process by analysing this strategy?
Sure, yeah. So the work took place largely through workshops with officers, also the cabinet member, reviewing documents. Again, what it was we were looking for at this piece of work is how the council is applying the Sustainable Development Principle. So in some ways, the STEP is just a vehicle to test that rather than the STEP itself. I think going forwards, we will be undertaking a review of the Wellbeing Future Generations Act at the council every year for the foreseeable future. Certainly how I would like to take it forward over the coming years is to not just look at a particular step in isolation within the context of the WFG Act. I think there is scope for us to be combining the WFG review with a review on the step that we're looking at. So this is very much about how you're applying the Sustainable Development Principle. I think in future I would like to combine that with a review on the actual step so that, as you're saying, we can then give you some feedback about the effectiveness of the social justice strategy, what you're doing, how effective the work is. This piece of work does not do that. That wasn't the intention of it, I'm afraid. And I think because this is quite a different approach for us with the WFG review, normally when we would be looking at a particular area, we'd be giving you judgments on how the council is doing. This report doesn't do that, but I'm hoping in future we can combine and do a larger piece of work, which will probably have two outputs from it. One would be how you're applying the Sustainable Development Principle, but also what the impact and outcomes of the work that you're doing actually is.
Brilliant, thank you. Following up on that, the effectiveness, I think in future, if you could refer to your colleagues, that's really useful. Because in the report, it talks about working with external parties and cites something called FEDIP, which, if you've read the minutes, it's talking about abolishing itself in February because it's not being very effective. The social advisory group, and I've attended nearly every one, had a paper in front of it that said it was defining poverty, but didn't define poverty, and was a discussion for an hour. So I think in future, I wouldn't separate from what the council says it's doing to its actual effectiveness in delivering anything. So, in a sense, it's hard to scrutinise something where you've just talked to officers and a cabinet member.
Yeah, I appreciate that this review has quite a narrow focus and is probably not what people are looking to get a view of when they read the report. But as I say, hopefully going forwards, we'll combine the WFG work into something larger so that we can give you assurance or otherwise on what is actually happening within a certain step and not just the WFG element of it.
Thank you. Are there any further questions on this item? Councillor Eason?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Really, it's following on from what Dimitri said. He said it a bit better than I was going to say it. But we seem, as a society, to have allowed ourselves to fall into a bit of a perfect storm, in as much as the opportunities to deal with poverty have always been there. They never go away. There's always going to be somebody in poverty. But we seem to have, as I say, created a perfect storm over the last number of years. We're to the point at the moment we, as a council, we don't know currently have any universal credits, claimants, digital skills to assess where they are. In other words, we should by now, universal credit's been in for a while and been in various parts of the country as well. We should be getting together the information to deal with these issues rather than finding little pockets on your rounds, because people are in difficulties now. We see the growth in the last number of years of food banks, where 10, 15 years ago, there were maybe 40,000 food banks, 40,000 claimants on food banks a year. Now it's nearly 1.5 million. We've allowed ourselves to sit back and not really address the problems. We've waited now to the situation where we are now, where what do we do about this? We don't have a big enough sweeping brush to clean it all up, and we don't have a big enough shovel to bury it. We need to do something, and we should have done this a while ago. And I feel that, as I said earlier, this report doesn't give me much information. It doesn't give me much hope on how we can actually deal with it. There's no meat in this as far as I'm concerned. So I'll just leave it like that. Otherwise, I might get into the wrong sort of discussion. Okay, thanks.
Just on that, I think, do you sit on Adult Select? Because we had the Trestle Trust in. So obviously we've got a larger site on food banks and the issues that people in Monmouthshire are facing. So obviously we can pull all this together as well.
Well, I do know that within the South Monmouthshire area, where there's a food bank operating in my area, where 4% of the population are considered to be having to rely on food banks. And that is disturbing. It is, I think, a very similar pattern across Great Britain. And it, to me, if we've got 4% of the population, that's quite a lot of number of people, particularly youngsters, and by and large, young girls, young women who've got families to look after, and that's it, they've got difficulties. And a lot of them are proud, a lot of them need help and won't ask for help. You can pick up help, you can pick up individuals if you're a governor of a school where the head teacher will notice that somebody coming to school is tired, for example, which means that they may be not getting the right nourishment or they're not getting the right amount of sleep. But it shouldn't be up to individual head teachers and individual schools to pick up these problems. Somehow we need to get a more solid grasp of the situation, to get the information on the doorstep, as you might say. I better leave it like that. Thank you. And David's mic is on, so it's affected.
Oh, sorry, Tony.
Kath, would you like to come in?
It's just really a point for information, really. We are working with digital communities through the Wales Co-op Centre to actually train some volunteers in digital skills. We're working alongside our Communities for Work programme. So we are recognising there is a problem there. We're sort of working through our hubs program, sort of centres to actually identify those people, get them the support, but also to train those volunteers to help them help each other. And part of that Food Communities for Work is also actually providing vouchers for the food bank. So there is some of that work going on, just for information.
The only thing I would say is that we seem to have got into the situation where food banks have become part of the welfare system, and I don't quite agree with that. We do have intervention groups within the education authority, in the part of our education authority. We do have intervention within Monmouthshire Housing. We do have intervention with our own housing options team. We also got Flying Start in certain parts of the county. And that also brings me to one point where Flying Start operates in my ward in a specific postcode. Because of redeveloping my area, some parents who are on Flying Start have had to move 200 yards. They fall out of the postcode into an area where they can't further use the food banks. So there are issues we need to address. And I know that the Monmouthshire's Flying Start coordinator is looking at the problems, I think, which may happen in Abergavenny as well, where people, because of development, lose the entitlement to some of the benefits. And Flying Start is important for young women, who it gives them the chance in the morning for their young children to get basic education and food, and allow the parents to have a bit more freedom. So there are issues we need to solve. Flying Start is one. It shouldn't be so restrictive. Housing intervention teams, Monmouthshire Housing and our own housing options teams, they work together when they need to work together, but we don't have a team that can go straight in. I got an email this morning for one about an issue which I'm dealing with, and it's getting there quietly. But we need to have a more solid team that's available, say through the cabinet member, to identify and pursue a route. You can't, on one hand, want to evict somebody, and on the other hand, try to avoid the eviction. You need to be there as a group together to try and avoid that situation. We're not doing that, and that's all part of the poverty, and that's all part of the society we seem to have created. And I think we've got to try and pull ourselves out of that.
Thank you, Councillor Eason. I'm going to make sure you get the minutes from that Adult Select Committee. And obviously when we get this report back from Swansea University, I think that will obviously have some positive key elements in it. Can I go Councillor Petrini, then Councillor Guthrie?
Can I just say, I don't think you're talking about specific... Tony's mentioned about Flying Start, but I actually work for Flying Start as a health visitor. and because it's sort of not agendized, I don't think I've got an interest to say, but I think, just for information, Flying Start is just not for working for mothers, it's working for families. Just to correct what Tony said, I don't think he meant that, but just to say it's not mothers and children, it's all families. And also with a food bank, I don't know if I misheard you, Tony, but actually the food bank is for everybody. It's not just for Flying Start. It's for everybody who needs it. And there's no restriction.
Yes, I understand that, and I fully agree with you, but the problems that come to me are generally young mothers.
Thank you. Councillor Petrini.
It was related to the social justice strategy and the Wellbeing Act, which I was unclear on, and I had it written down, but I forgot to ask it. I'm a bit like Matt, I'm a geek. So it's interesting to hear about that University Swansea model. But I think what you said, sorry, I don't forgot your name, Charlotte, is it? Charlotte, and what Matt said about measuring poverty, I think on an income and deprivation level, it's actually quite well developed. If, took me a day of serious research to do it in this document. What isn't well developed and is a nightmare, and I wonder if the Swansea model will cooperate, and I wonder if you come across it, is if you're looking at the wellbeing generation and how you benefit the other goals, community and so forth, social capital is the key switch, isn't it? So we can measure someone's income and try and assess whether that affects them in a particular way. But if you look at all the research, it shows it's actually your networks of who you have access to, the information you have, that then benefits your life in other ways, and also materially. And I didn't see you talk about that in your analysis in relation to the well-being goals and how you assess it as a WAO and our strategy, because in our strategy, to be fair, in the social justice strategy, it talks about social capital, and you haven't looked at it.
We haven't looked specifically at that. This has got quite a narrow remit, this piece of work, in terms of measuring the... Sorry
to interject. It is a narrow piece of work, but the Wellbeing Generations Act surely must include an analysis of social capital if it's going to benefit the other measures.
We're looking at it from the 5 ways of working, so we'd be looking at it. So we've highlighted measuring outcomes in terms of prevention, which obviously links into that, in terms of the council doesn't yet have a developed way of measuring the impact of what it's doing in terms of outcomes.
I appreciate that, and that's true, but your views, or given that you will look at other councils eventually, about how if you're going to measure impact and outcome, you surely need to look at social capital side of it. Have you increased the network of that individual to access maybe jobs, information that can be beneficial materially? And that surely is preventative, because if all the research shows someone who's less lonely and less isolated has more friends. It sounds simple, I'm simplifying it. Has more friends, has more work colleagues, goes out, socializes more, is far less likely to experience poverty and social isolation than someone who is. Does that make sense? Am I making myself clear? So it's surely it's part of the preventative measure. Surely it is. Is it not?
No, that would come under the preventative measure. It's not something that came up as part of our review. It's not something that that officers discussed with us.
Sorry, another point for information really, the Community Focused Schools programme that's operating in Chepstow actually does exactly that in terms of looking at networks locally, looking at how we link schools with businesses, with other community groups in terms of increasing networks, and also opportunities for apprenticeships, sort of placements within business for young people, etc. Also in terms of the work that Owen Wills is doing with volunteering, again, is very much about increasing network through the Bede Community Leadership Programme, so people learning from each other. So there's various different initiatives that are ongoing that help towards that. So in terms of social capital.
I appreciate that, may I, Chair? I appreciate that, and that's individual moments, and I don't know how effective they are. They could be amazing, they might not be. I don't know. I'm going to hold reservation on that. But the fact you haven't analysed it from a holistic perspective, one of the key elements of stopping someone falling into poverty or falling into that trap, because it's a cycle, isn't it? If you fall into poverty, you become socially isolated, or if you become socially isolated, become poor, generally speaking, it's because you've lost those networks. And I appreciate we have some actions, and I'd be interested to see if they are effective. But on a holistic level, we talk about it in our strategy. It surely relates to the preventative model, but it's not been discussed. And that's what surprises me, is what I'm trying to say.
No, it's certainly something that we'll bear in mind in future. This piece of work has very much looked at the arrangements in place rather than sort of testing them or looking at the outcomes of those. Again, in future, I'd like to look at things more widely and the outputs of those. So that's certainly something that we take into account in future reviews.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Councillor Dovey.
Just one. I've been listening to what is a pretty well-informed debate, I think, from both sides. The one thing that concerns me is how much of what we are doing now is almost historic, if you understand what I mean. You are reacting to what has happened, so you're sort of backfilling to put it right. What level of resource are you using to discover what might be coming down the line towards us by looking at what other counties are doing to combat something that isn't yet with us? I'm finding this difficult to explain. Isn't yet with us, but the profile of that county is similar to sort of ours, and there must be a number of them that are like us, so that we are, if you like, able to forestall the problem before it gets to us. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? It's finding out what are the issues that we're not suffering from yet, but are likely to suffer from, and be geared up to able to meet that challenge when it comes here. Are you managing to resource that?
Thank you, Matt. Would you like to come in?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. And probably a couple of things to say there, and neither of them give the entirety of what we'd like to get to. But on one level, I think the report highlights and we acknowledge we need to grow our data capacity and capability, because some of that is looking at those sort of future pieces of information that will help us understand what's coming down the tracks in terms of that sort of data analysis at a whole county level, but also at a community level. On the other side of things, it's a different step. So, of course, within our corporate plan, there are these 79 different actions, and this report looks at one of them. But just for sort of context, some of the other work going on is with sort of Public Health Wales and Gwent Police, based on a piece of work called Adverse Childhood Experiences, done by Public Health Wales. And that looks at some of the factors that are present which causes negative outcomes in people's life, be it exposure to drugs, alcohol, domestic violence, and these are all of the factors that can lead to worse outcomes for individuals. So that research and the work that's happening at Public Service Board level helps us understand some of those factors that ideally, in terms of preventative work, for those people that have already experienced those, we're looking, all public services are looking to sort of remedy the situation and put support services in. But what we want to get to is a position where you are preventing those things happening in the first place. So it's a mix of using the research that's already been done, and then, yeah, absolutely, and I absolutely get your point, enhancing our data modelling so we understand the communities and the individuals at greatest risk, so the proper agencies can intervene and work and support those families, those individuals at a much earlier stage, to minimise the risk that they will fall into poverty, be isolated, and so on. So a lot of the factors that this work is looking to prevent.
Thank you, Matt. Are there any more questions now? Can I ask Sarah, Councillor Jones, if you'd like to comment?
Thank you, Chair, and I will do just briefly. I just want to say thank you, Charlotte and Wales Audit Office, for coming in and for the important role that you do. It's important to have that impartial approach to provide that lens over the piece of work that's really important to us as an authority. For me, the report that you've presented to us, again, really important also on members' comments, because it's enabling us to build on an approach that we've developed relatively recently in terms of bringing it together under the social justice strategy. And the actual outputs of the social justice strategy itself, I think, again, very welcome for you to come back. We'd be really keen to have that approach reviewed to look specifically at the outputs. I mean, we're the first local authority in Wales to have a social justice strategy, so as much as there'll be elements that we can learn from your review, I'm sure there's other local authorities that can learn from us in terms of actually taking that forward and being innovative in that approach. As I say, the feedback that you've given us in this report is really helpful because it gives us that opportunity to reflect, to sit back, to stop and look at what we're doing, consider our approach, and where necessary, we will of course make those amends and bolster what we're already doing. Just to be clear, the social justice strategy is going to remain our overarching approach to addressing these issues because it prioritises tackling poverty and social isolation within it. We do have that poverty action plan or tackling poverty action plan. And again, I'd be keen to bring that back, if that's possible, Chair, alongside other updates to members. There's a series of actions that have been listed in our response to WAO in this report. So again, we'd be really keen to come back potentially in the spring if members are happy with that approach. And similarly, if there's any specific pieces of work that you've picked up on which are addressed or highlighted in here, just examples, Val, you mentioned the GovTech work. Again, we'd be really keen to come back and show you the progress that's being made, really positive. Charlotte, yourself, you mentioned something around, addressing the issue with farmers, farming community. There's a big piece of work going on at the moment around the impact on mental health and social isolation of our farming community. So if we could update on that. And similarly around social capital, I think that's a really important point that was made. That's a really important part of our social justice strategy. The Community Partnership Development Team, everything it does is around social capital and building strengths in that area. So again, we can come back to this committee and update as and when is required. And just lastly, if I may, Chair, Councillor Dovey mentioned about future gazing and horizon scan. I think that was a really important point again. I think there's some really useful work already happening around that area. So, for example, when we've looked at the budget, we've done things like cumulative impact assessments. So we're trying to actively look at how decisions are going to impact. That's probably more short term, and you're looking more at the sort of what's coming down the line, which could affect our communities in terms of policy, etc. And again, I think, Matt's response was very, very good, but we can come back and address those issues with you if this committee would like us to. So I think what I'm trying to say is we're welcome to come back, we're welcome to update. I think we're doing some really positive work in this area. I'm really proud of the approach we've taken. I'm pleased that WAO have come in and reviewed this piece of work, keen that you come back. And I just asked the committee if you'd be happy for us to come back and share some of that good work, but also to be challenged over progress in the spring. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Can I just thank Charlotte for attending today and presenting this report. Obviously, it had a narrow focus, and going forward, it could benefit more outcomes. I'd welcome you very much to return in the spring on an update and have an update on this Swansea data that you'll be receiving. Do you know when we will be receiving that, Matt? Just no? Okay.
No, probably a little too early to say it at this stage, Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much. We're just going to have a 2-minute rest break and then we'll continue, okay? Okay, thank you. Hope everyone's had your break, and let's continue. So the next item is Green Infrastructure Strategy pre-decision scrutiny of the strategy. Gosh, tongue-tied again. So we've got Matthew Lewis and Colette Bosley presenting this today. Thank you.
Thank you, members. If I'm just a very, very brief introduction, because Colette isn't, I believe you've had the presentation hopefully in advance, and Colette is just going to run through the presentation fairly swiftly, and then we're happy to answer questions at the end of that, obviously.
Okay, thanks very much. Right, I think we've got, hopefully you can see it up on the screen and you've got a copy of it. But basically, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background, really. The Green Infrastructure Strategy was commissioned in 2018 through a Welsh Government Capital GI grant. The strategy was informed through 2 stakeholder workshops, covering a broad range of consultees, both internal and external. They covered a range from council departments, NRW, Welsh Government, adjacent LAs, Gwent Wildlife Trust, AUMB, as well as some of yourselves maybe. I think there's a few that were part of our group, county councillors, town councillors and various interest groups. The strategy comprises of 3 elements, volume 1 being the main body, the strategy itself, volume 2 being the delivery plan, which identifies the green infrastructure project, and the 3rd element, which is the green infrastructure GIS spatial database. It's very much intended to be a living document, which basically we can update to reflect Monmouthshire's emerging policies and priorities, and also identify any underlying baseline information which emerges as well. The strategy provides the overarching framework basically for the delivery of the green infrastructure approach across the council, complementing our award-winning GI SPG, our GI working protocol, and our GI management plan guidance and green infrastructure action plan for pollinators, all of which provide a complementary suite of documents which help us guide the council in its decisions on strategic planning, planning policy, development management, funding bids and projects on the ground. Sorry, I think I'm going too close to the mic there. I can hear myself echoing. So very quickly, I won't read out obviously what we've got there, but you've got it in front of you. So the strategy tries to identify some key messages. So we've got a definition of green infrastructure for anybody that's a little bit unsure. It clarifies the benefits of the integrated and joined-up approach towards green infrastructure, and it emphasises the need to recognise the multifunctionality of green infrastructure assets. So, for example, green space basically can be used for food production, for providing access for nature, for recreation, for flood management, and for also supporting climate change mitigation through better management and planting. And it also, one of the key messages also is that green infrastructure provides an approach for projects to be delivered which has shared outcomes and maximises the mutual benefits. So on your on the screens and on the handouts, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background really to why we've sort of, where this has come from and what GI is about. And effectively, the green infrastructure strategy sets out the council's approach really to enhancing biodiversity and increasing ecosystems resilience through GI. So it delivers on Monmouthshire's Biodiversity and Resilience Forward Plan, which is a requirement under the Environment Act, and Planning Policy 10, which embraces the green infrastructure approach towards all its policies. It also embraces the Council's approach to delivering health and well-being outcomes through GI approach, which is very much in line with well-being and future generation goals and the Monmouthshire Wellbeing Plan and wellbeing objectives. So just as a quick overview, you've got, as I've mentioned, the three elements, volume 1 being the strategic framework, which covers the vision, the core aims, strategic objectives, priorities, the settlement-based strategic network, the key GI assets, and the GI assessment of the ecosystem services. Lots of jargon, and I'm sorry about that, but it's the only way to sort of rattle through it. So if there's any clarification after, please ask. So that basically summarises the content of the Volume 1. And within that, we have a green infrastructure vision, which you may be familiar with because we've already got the same one in our green infrastructure SPG. So for consistency, obviously, we've got that there again, just to reinforce it. And from that, really, we've identified and underpinned 3 core aims, which we've identified as being enriching people's lives through engagement and activity, building on strong and vibrant places and communities in Monmouthshire, and conserving and protecting and enhancing Monmouthshire's GI assets. And obviously the purpose of the vision and the core aims really is to provide the overarching framework really for the positive actions by all stakeholders involved in the protection and management and enhancement of green infrastructure in Monmouthshire. So in support of the vision and the core aims, we've identified 5 strategic objectives and supporting priorities. We haven't set all of those out there, just summarised the objectives for you. So I won't again read all of that out, but you can see them there. And what I thought would be useful is just to summarise for you very in a sort of a pull out really from the document, the strategic GI network. Which basically provides the overarching network for planning, management and delivery across the county. So the county is split into 5 GI zones, which is as you can see, the Gwent Levels at the bottom, as you would expect, the Wye Valley to the east, the Usk catchment centrally, the Wye catchment to the north, and the Brecon Beacons to the northwest, sorry. So it's very much a sort of collective approach towards delivering a green infrastructure strategic network, and that's delivered also through the strategic green corridors approach as well, which is the 4 sections where you can see all those squiggly lines happening. So I put this slide in really just to sort of remind you and make you aware of what green infrastructure assets are, to be honest. Sometimes people can get a bit confused what they are, what they mean. And they're basically a range of different things. So from heritage sites, private gardens, allotments, green walls, they could be county sites, and anything really that the people use, green spaces that sometimes people forget that even just, community green spaces are really important. And those are an important part of the contribution for green infrastructure assets. So just pop that in really just for information. And as I've mentioned, the strategy comprises 3 elements. So volume 1, I've just given a very quick summary of. Volume 2 is the delivery plan. And this is the sort of meaty bit in some ways for us in terms of the delivery on the ground. So it's very much about the sort of, the delivery of strategic and landscape scale projects, really which relate to the county and to our actual growth areas and rural secondary settlements. And what you've got on the sheet there and on the screen is on the right-hand side is just a little summary of the type of action plans that we've got within that. So that came out very much as part of the workshops with the communities and interest groups that we had. So this one is the Abergavenny Rivers project, which we've actually started working with NRW and with Dŵr Cymru as well. So we've made a little start on that. And we're also engaged with community groups such as the Castle Meadows Friends Group. So we're engaged and we're expanding on it. The next slide then is just really the third element of the strategy is very much the an overview of the database, the Green Infrastructure Database. So the great sort of value that we've got is we've got a lot of data which we've got in a GIS format, which we can make available and we can also interrogate to help us. Very much, as I said, a living document and something that we'll all need to contribute and update as we move forward. So how will the strategy be used? Very sort of finally, really, we've got the sort of points, key headlines there, and I'm not going to read all of those out, but just to quickly summarise, obviously it contributes to the national and local wellbeing goals and objectives and the South East Wales area statement. It'll inform, obviously, the Environment Act 2016 Section 6 biodiversity duty. It'll guide and provide a delivery mechanism for actions identified in the Climate Change Emergency Plan. It'll provide a platform for the delivery of Planning Policy Wales 10, which we know it's all about wellbeing and placemaking, and support the delivery of active travel and rights of way improvements by promoting sustainable access. So then finally the strategy will provide the framework to provide further partnership actions and future external funding applications. And the final slide that I'd incorporated really was just so you could see how the interrelationships really between the strategic objectives and the wellbeing goals and objectives actually happen and sort of, you know, physically set out in that way. That also links back nicely to the action plans. I don't know if anybody picked that up, but we've got that section linking in the wellbeing goals, the objectives in each of the action plans as well. So there's lots of interconnections and correlation and multifunctionality happening not only in the document but in what we want to achieve as well. So that's a very, very sort of quick summary and just to take you through what you've got there. And if there's any questions that you'd like to just sort of ask and seek clarification on, then Matthew and myself are here to help.
Thank you, Colette, for that. Members, over to you. Anyone have any questions regarding this? Councillor Smith?
A comment from a simple soul. I do like your final slide, and I do like it in colour. It's far better. But it does show, you know, it's very simply shows. You could show that to somebody and say, well, this is the way you want to proceed. These are the way things link, and dumpty-dumpty-dump along. So that, to me, is very useful. I found it very interesting reading. Thank you. And also, it makes you really think, and if only people would think that little bit of ground somewhere, what you do with it, the impact it can actually have and the way it can encourage other people, well, you can do that and things progress from there. So thank you very much. And it's quite interesting because I found my the 2014 draft supplementary. Quite like some of the diagrams in there, actually. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Members, are there any? Councillor East.
Yeah, just one brief question. You operate with a good width, a depth of volunteers. What could you expand on what your volunteers actually do?
Are you referring to the people that were engaged in the process? Yeah. Well, basically, the engagement was part of a process of trying to gather information for, as you know, I think you were involved in one of our workshops actually. Yes, I think so. So it's very much, as I said, a living document. So we see that as something as continuing to happen. So the engagement process with communities and interest groups and organisations is very much about trying to continue that process really and seek what we've said. And I've done a few presentations actually to various sort of to groups and to various interest organisations, that we will continue to do that and gather information and gather project work and then engage with those groups to actually carry out those opportunities where they arise and where the grant funding is available. So that's something that we intend to continue doing. The action plan is the critical part of it really, where we're actually identifying those projects and we can engage with communities, because it isn't just about us delivering something and us engaging and trying to get the funding. It's actually about ownership really, and the communities and the interest groups engaging with that. Interest groups such as Castle Meadows Friends Group, and the various Friends groups that we deal with, well, they're just really good examples of the kinds of interests that Monmouthshire has from those kinds of organisations and groups.
You show your interlinks across Monmouthshire in terms of Brecon Beacons and River Wye and what. We also got the living level. You do mention living levels, but there's got the living levels in the south of the county, the £2 million project on enhancing that environment. Do you have how deeply do you get involved with the Living Levels project?
Quite deeply. We both Matthew and myself, we sit on the project, on the delivery group, we call it, and also Matthew's on the project board as well. So we're fully engaged on that, and we're delivering on the projects as well. So those projects are an integral part and integrated into the action plan outputs that we're looking at. So some of the proposals that we're looking at with the strategy will add value to what we're trying to do in the levels as well. So it's a complete sort of, it's very, very well integrated. And as part of the living levels, we did do a green infrastructure strategy for the whole of the Gwent levels. So that was taken into account in delivering the wider strategy for the whole of the county. So it's fully integrated, and we're aware of what's happening, and we know we're adding value. That's the thing. We're not duplicating, we're adding value, and that's the really complementary bit of this, is that we're moving things forward in a way which is beneficial for everybody. So
I'm racking my brains to think of the latest project where you go into the local communities with a £2,000 pot for each community to have a level of enhancement within them. Could you explain more to members on that? I got part of it, but not all of it.
Perhaps I can just explain that. That's part of the, as you say, part of the Living Levels delivery. It's part of a wider project which is being funded through RCDF European money, which is delivering really the destination elements of Living Levels. Living Levels, as you know, has got sort of effectively 3 different elements to it, but they're integrated. But there's an element which is around making the levels a more attractive and legible place for people to visit, both local people and visitors. There's an element which is around, as you would expect, the natural environment in terms of enhancing the interest that already exists on the levels. And then there's a third element, which I know you're well aware of, which is the element around involving communities, volunteering, looking at some of the historical research, some of the arts, like the Big Skies event that was in Caldecott, etc., etc. So the schools and learning, so that they're all integrated together. But that offer of a sum to the community councils within the levels was part of the destination strategy, which has identified a number of what's been described as primary hubs, which are sites like Caldecott Castle, the centre of Chepstow, Megan Marsh, Black Rock, where visitors will find, not much has gone in yet, but perhaps in 12 months' time you'll be able to see that visitors will find some consistent information right across both Monmouthshire, Newport, and into the east side of Cardiff as well. And then the original conception was that would then have a series of what were described as community hubs, which would have been more sort of panels and information. But on further consideration, the thought was, well, actually that's starting to litter the landscape with a lot of stuff. And as Councillor Webb will know, we've done that approach in the Wye Valley. It's worked up to a point, but it does mean that you have a massive investment in terms of stuff that you then still need to maintain. So the view was taken, actually it would be a little bit more sympathetic and probably respond to communities' needs to set some criteria, but then allow individual communities to suggest what would be the best investment for them in terms of making the area more accessible. So some people have come back with quite physical proposals in terms of external work. Some people have come back with stuff that enhances the use of community facilities. There's obviously some limits on what that can be because it's being funded through a combination of European funding and National Lottery Heritage Fund money, but I think it's, hopefully it'll prove to be quite an innovative approach in that way, slightly different to just putting a load of panels up, basically.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just add that, is that all? Just to add really the interconnection then with with the GI strategy is that those kinds of projects and those outputs that are coming out of the project are effectively legacy projects which feed into the action plans for the green infrastructure strategy, which means we can look at additional opportunities for funding those issues and those opportunities that come out of the living levels. So it's a means of moving things forward for the future as well and sustaining it. And I think that's really important part of that part of the legacy for living levels.
10 or 12 years where there was a project on entry into Wales of massive, not murals, massive flags and not what. It fell apart because of funding. I hope we don't go down that route with the Living Levels project, but there we are.
Councillor Webb.
Thank you very much. Yes, every meeting I go to with regards to this, it's so important to actually let people in the other areas in Cardiff and know what we're about, and also into the Brecon Beacons. Brecon Beacons are fully involved with your discussions, are they, in all this? I really appreciate this. It's a really important time, and the fact that well-being is so important. The people that don't realise the national park and all the countryside that we have in Monmouthshire is available for everybody to use for free. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Brecon Beacons were part of the consultation process and involved with us in the workshops that we had. So they've inputted into the strategy and part of that process. So we work closely, as you know, with Brecon Beacons anyway, and those links are really important to us. So we're continuing to maintain those. Yeah.
Councillor Smith.
Lambaddock Ward, the community council, I'm not sure how, yes, there is an involvement, I don't know. But they have, over the years, they've now produced about 6 or 7 footpaths. And we've got a good footpath working group. I don't know how many, I think they work out as well from the ward. But they're to be commended for what they do. They really do, because it's voluntary effort. They're good leaflets that are going together. I probably sometimes think that ratepayers say, well, why are we paying for that? But it's giving access to the countryside, and I just wish you could see more people walking. You see the bikers, all right, the motorbikers. Could I ask a favour, please? I presume, if there are any spare copies of this report in colour, could I have 3 or 4? Because I leave things various places, and people then become interested and pick up, and they look at something, and it can trigger. Don't print anything extra off. But if there's anything spare going, please could I have a few? Thank you.
We haven't printed any off yet formally, so we will make some available. That definitely. Just trying to economise, to be honest. I printed a few off this today, really, but we're trying to keep our paper consumption down.
It's just that
we will. We do.
Document
yes.
can trigger somebody. Oh, I
That's
didn't
right.
know they did that, and it rolls on, and it can.
No, you're right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Our intention would be that obviously we're planning to take this through to Cabinet to get approval, and then after that then we will do a proper version of it and do some printed copies, etc, etc.
Councillor Devi.
I don't know whether my question forget to turn it on and then forget to turn it off. I don't know whether my question has just been answered, because I was going to ask, of those 3 areas, I would like to have 3 copies for that, for the Chepstow area, if that was possible. I'd also like to ask a question. I was at the AOMB, very ably chaired by Councillor Webb this week, which I thought was excellent. And I'm conscious of the fact that on the Gloucestershire side, I know we shouldn't be talking, well, yeah, we should be talking about, on the Gloucestershire side, they see the AOMB and the whole area and its industrial heritage, that whole bit, as all being one and being part of what is a growing dynamic area plan for the Forest of Dean, so it encompasses industry, education, and opportunity for the young people to have for the future jobs within the area, etc., and keep the community together. I mean, it is really city deal, but it's a county, if you like, which is really great. Now, a couple of things have happened within Monmouthshire, in that we wanted to have a development in Monmouthshire, down in the south part of the county, and that's been absolutely knocked on the head by the Assembly government, with them saying that they don't see Monmouthshire like that. They see Monmouthshire as basically all agriculture, some buildings, but they don't see industry side that should be going along that to make it a living community. And there is another example that I won't go into. Well, I will. It's the planning policy that we've just had come in front of us. And the planning policy in that, when they talk about transport, the officer who wrote the report really flew in the face of what we are basically trying to do in transport. And I am concerned that the way things are going, the county could be something preserved in aspect, without any future for our young people, with a limitation on the housing that we can do within the county. And on the side of us, on the Gloucestershire side, they are going like, well, the wind. And on the Newport side, they're having all the development and the investment in transport and everything there. So we're in danger of becoming an anachronism, if you like, a very pretty anachronism. And I am very, very concerned about it. I think your report is brilliant. I like everything that you do about it, and it's why I always turn up to the AMB things. But I really think there is an issue here, and I just wonder whether Monmouthshire, with its involvement in the AMB, should have a view as to what should be happening to the county on a larger scale. Because if you look at the original concept of the city deal, which started off in Los Angeles, the thing was that you kept the essence of the culture, which was the full mix. And we are going to be in danger of losing that. And we're going to be in danger of not having employment locally for our young people. And it's a very dangerous place we're going for, as far as this county is concerned, I think. And I just wonder whether you have a view, or do you have the ability to comment on how you think or what you think should be happening around this beautiful, beautiful county, and what is being done with it, but what's happening to the rest of the county. Sorry, I went on a bit about that.
Well, we certainly don't see the green infrastructure strategy as being, to use your phrase, about preserving the landscaping aspect. And that's why, when you look at that last slide, it talks around all of those outcomes. And one of those outcomes down there is supporting sustainable economic development. And that's, this isn't about an either-or conversation. It's about how you can use the green infrastructure to support all of those outcomes.
Right.
That's not to say, obviously, that in some cases, in terms of biodiversity, it is about protection and enhancement, but in other cases, it won't be. We also need to be quite clear that this isn't a separate policy document in terms of a planning policy. This is part of the background and the information that helps to inform planning decisions, and that's why it's so closely linked to the SPG. So it's not setting up as a separate vision, if you like, in terms of the planning side of things. It's very much working hand in hand with planning policy in terms of providing background and information both at a strategic level and on individual applications. Because as you know, one of the things that comes out on individual applications often is identifying through Section 106 agreements, etc., as to what other benefits can arise in order to allow the development to take place. And often, some of the actions that have been set out in the projects are projects that are potentially fundable through Section 106. So it's a broad vision, but it's setting that context to allow planning policy, etc., to develop and address some of the issues. So that's possibly not. You know, that's probably about as far as we can go in terms of responding to that element.
I thank you for that. I mean, you are echoing the concerns basic in many ways that I have. I just think it is important that the AOMB should have a view on what is happening around it, if you like. And I'm just concerned not only for the ALMB and its preservation. I am extremely concerned about where we're going as a county through either muddle thinking, not within the county, elsewhere, and I just wanted to air it here and
we certainly see this as sitting alongside other policy areas that we're responsible for. So, for example, the destination management plan, you know, identifies the economic value that can arise out of tourism, obviously in terms of things like the walking product, etc. The the value of landscape and the countryside itself, which is still the main attractor for visitors to Monmouthshire. So it's very much integrated together, and obviously some of those issues will be explored through the, particularly on the AONB, through the AONB management plan, which, as you know, is, as we discussed on Monday, is now for public consultation for the review, which obviously I realise that's internal to the AONB, but you know, that's another opportunity to influence some of those issues.
It is very much embracing the green economy effectively, so that we are looking at all those opportunities collectively and how we can make benefits within those. So, you know, as Matthew said, it is about sort of, you know, looking at the whole range of things, the social, the economic, and the health and the well-being. So it's considering the wider aspects, not just one particular area. So it is that's the beauty of green infrastructure. It is diverse, it is integrated, and it is about sort of looking at how all can work in a complementary way. So yeah.
Can I just note that the Wye Valley ANOB management plan is actually coming back to Strong Communities on December the 10th? Okay. Are there any more questions? Okay. Are you happy for this to go to Cabinet? Can I thank Colette for what I think is come from members for a fantastic report, and everyone enjoyed reading it. Was it Councillor Smith or Councillor Webb you asked for a handout to distribute to Councillor Smith to distribute to residents and inform people?
I leave them in certain places.
Mm-hmm.
I know the groups meet there and they pick them up and look at things, which is good. Yeah.
I just asked for 3 things.
Yeah. We'll sort that out.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you ever so much, all. Okay, so now we're going to confirm minutes of previous meetings. So we have special meeting held on the 10th of September 2019. Is everyone happy with those minutes recorded, or any comments? Councillor Traherne?
I'm not down for apologies, and I normally send apologies in. So I'd like to say that I probably sent apologies in, but they're not recorded. Thank you.
Councillor Eason, did you want to? we've got the special meeting on the 26th of September 2019. Is everyone happy with those records?
Yeah, sorry, I've because they, you know, it's easy to make slip-ups. On the second page, it doesn't. First bullet point, if you read that, the second sentence, members remind the units needed to be considered as, you know, just to make sure the printing's okay for the records. And also that set the 1, 2, 3, 4th bullet point, which makes works loan board, gives, provide. You know, you might like to remove one of those. Yeah, okay. Not being nitpicky at all, but just reading it, and it goes out as a document from us. And you, yeah, there's democratic services. And there was also, I wish I could read my own writing, Chairman, sorry. All right. ICT system. Just a comment, if I could make, please. It's on the one members challenge, 1, 2, 3, 4 bullet point down, page 211. The specific reference there that I made, members stress that the council must lead and try to influence as well as what we can do directly. And I made a specific point about the Severn barrage. It was supported by Councillor Duffy. And I think I would like to see the words just put in there if members were in agreement. It was raised there because this is a project that could be of huge benefit to us. It could also be not of benefit, but we should, I think, as a council, be considering that. So if we could include that, and also, sorry, item 5, the 3rd bullet point, you might want to remove Jane's name because it doesn't quite make sense, that one. And then nothing to do with the minutes, but just a point. I will next week go to a meeting of the Air Quality Committee, and I really think their minutes should come to your committee, Chairman. They're going nowhere at the moment, and I think they are very relevant, and there is an issue that needs addressing. So, on that, thank you very much, and I think the minutes are fine.
I do apologise, I've missed 15th of October 2019. Is everyone in agreement with those? Yes?
Oh, is that all on it? Yes. Yes, please, because when I asked for a definition of litter somewhere, might be on some others, it was definitely that it related to hedge clippings as to...
Put that in, Val.
Have you got hedge clippings written there?
We said garden waste or garden waste.
Yeah,
it was anything that was left
hedge
behind.
clippings are an issue in the country when people get punctures in their cars, the drainage is disrupted, and there needs to be some care, some attention.
I think with regards to waste, if you're saying hedge clippings, it is garden waste, but I will check that with Carl.
Yeah, I can remember asking Carl, and no, you see, that's the comments made. I can't see them sweeping it up. It does need addressing. Farmers' waste or whoever's waste, clippings on the road, they are clogging up our drainage systems and compounding problems and compounding the bad quality of our roads. And if we don't start to address things, we don't get anywhere. So I agree, it'll be a difficult challenge, gentlemen.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. We'll move on to item 7, the Strong Communities Forward Work Programme, so I'll hand you over to Hazel for that.
Yes, you may or may not have noticed that there's going to be a change in the date of your next meeting. It was scheduled for election day, so Your meeting's been usurped. Well, far be it for me to argue with a general election. But what we've proposed is holding the meeting on the afternoon of the 10th. So for some people, I don't know if that involves any of you, there's adult select that morning. So it would be a long day. Does that affect anyone here?
It does me. It's a Tuesday.
It's Tuesday the 10th. Because it's near Christmas, the diary was really busy, and Democratic Services said that the only possibility really was the afternoon of the 10th. So it does mean that in the morning there's adult select. So for some of you, it might be a full day of scrutiny. Yeah, I know it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult to do this on individual availability, but given that Democratic Services said that actually it was one of the only dates where we could get the chamber and was free in the diary. So are you happy to proceed with that?
The only question, Chair, is what is actually going to be on the agenda that day? Will be
Well, we've got, I was coming on to that now. We've got the Rights of Way Improvement Plan. Sorry? No, separate subject. Separate subject. It's pre-decision scrutiny on the final Rights of Way Improvement Plan. So it's been through an assessment stage. There'll be a formal review, preparation of a draft plan, and then formal consultation prior to the decision. So this is pre-decision scrutiny on the final plan. And then, following on from what we discussed briefly about the AONB, we've got the Wye Valley AONB Management Plan, and they would like to consult us. So our role is to look at their plan, it's their plan, but they want to consult us on it prior to them adopting it. Now, in the past, we've been asked to be involved and to give a view, and we've said, well, it's your plan and we're not going to get involved in it. But they keep asking, and they really do want to have your views on their plan. So they've asked if they can consult you as part of their consultation process.
The only question is how many of our members are on the AONB at the moment? I think it's 2 of you, isn't it? 4 of this committee.
So you could declare that, but it's not prejudicial.
It's not prejudicial?
No.
All right, okay.
And it's a consultation. It's you as a committee giving your views on their plan. It's very straightforward in terms of your role.
This is 4.
Sorry? 4. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I shouldn't see any problem with you giving a view of their plan. As a committee, you've been asked to give a view on their plan. You know, it's nice that they want to engage with you, basically. It's not scrutiny, they're consulting you. They're out to consultation on their plan. They want to consult you.
Right, that's fine. But it says on our forward work programme scrutiny. So it is actually consultation.
Well, yeah, you are technically scrutinising their plan, but you can make recommendations to them on things you think they should change to their plan. But what I'm saying is it's a consultative. You don't have... they're not obligated to change their plan because you've made recommendations. They're consulting you. They want your views.
I accept that. So our 2 members won't be needing to make a vote because it's a consultation. If it's scrutiny, you're making a vote. That's all.
Well, we don't normally vote in scrutiny. I mean, it's rarely, but I wouldn't have thought that this was something where we'd get to a vote. I don't see any problems in terms of voting and prejudicial interests. You've just been asked for your views. Okay? Okay. Are we all okay with the dates change and it's an afternoon? It'll be an afternoon, 2 o'clock, but don't forget 1:30 pre-meeting. Yes, we always have pre-meetings beforehand, and it really does help us, you know.
I'm going to do a brief of them now.
Yes, okay. So we're gonna finish the meeting now, and I'm going to pass over to the chair. She wants to have a short